Unmuted.
Unmuted. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm waiting for some talking points, but that's okay. It's not a problem. So I'm going to call this work session to order. It's a work session regarding boards and commissions, organization, and 2024 Sunset Audit Plan. We'll go ahead and start with introductions.
Mark Littlefield.
Zach Johnson.
Anna Brawley.
Exalto.
Christopher Constant on the phone. I believe we have Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Thanks. We have Legislative Services, Assembly Council, some folks from the Department of Law, the Clerk's Office, and the Deputy Chief of Staff. Why don't you come on down? So I will go ahead and hand the mic off to Ms. Alto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this work session comes out of a couple of things. One is we postponed a number of boards and commissions appointments, and I believe it was spoken about at rules yesterday, which I was sorry to miss, but I've been briefed. But really wanted to have the broader conversation about how the assembly intersects with boards and commissions and really do an overview. We haven't done that as a body in, I think, quite a long time. We have a number of documents with us today. We have the ADA Advisory Commission, AO, with a public hearing set for the 16th. We have the Port of Alaska Modernization Program Design Advisory Board, AO, also set for public hearing on the 16th. We have an introduced AO subject to introduction on the 16th around the Houseless Lived Experience Advisory Board. And then we'll also talk briefly about the Public Safety Advisory Commission and really just kind of capture some of these things as we talk about boards and commissions in general. So with that, unless there's any other preliminaries, we'll just kind of hop right in. And at the end, I'm going to just review our plan for the board appointments on Tuesday night as well. So don't let me forget to do that. I figured we'd end with what we're actually going to do Tuesday. So go to the next slide. So boards and commissions, they're established one of two ways, either in charter or code. And so I've put the charter section there for you all to be able to read. May remember recently establishing one via charter, which is the ACE Fund Board. That one's now through charter. Otherwise, we can do it through code. And once you bring up Title IV, it's actually on the Muni Code. It's pretty easy to take a look and see each of the kind of the general pieces that apply to boards and commissions, as well as then getting into the specifics of each board or commission as it's codified. Boards and commissions established by charter often have a corresponding code section. So just because you see it in code doesn't mean it wasn't established by charter. So you'll always want to go back and check. All right, next slide. So some quick facts. So this is really just some basic stuff, but I think it's important that we just think through them. Some are required by charter or charter amendments. So the MOA Trust Fund Board, it's an advisory board. It was one we took to the voters. So that's now through charter, a charter amendment, similar to the ACE Fund, which we just talked about. They may sunset, boards and commissions may sunset per code. It's usually accompanied by an audit report and a recommendation when they're going to sunset. So for example, the ADA Advisory Board, it sunset. And so the AO 2024-66 is to reinstate that particular board. Do you want to?
Your call.
Yeah.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. Question about the sunset. Is it, because it says they may sunset per code. I think a lot of them do. Is it by default that most boards and commissions sunset unless you explicitly say it? Because I know there's like a sunset section of code. I guess I'm just curious, like if you were to create a new board and you didn't address the sunset issue, doesn't it have to sunset? Is that right?
So some explicitly do not sunset per code. So it's kind of in the inverse. So otherwise, yes, they all seem to sunset unless the code says they do not. And then we have the other AO that's in your stack of papers here today.
I have a quick question. I don't know that that's That's quite true, Dean. Question, don't the sunset dates in the code have a sunset date in them, like a specific date? So it's the other way, I think, where it's called out to sunset.
There's two ways. There's one that calls each one, it's in each section of code. This board sunsets on this day. This board provisions of Title IV, whatever the section is, I can't remember, do not apply to this board.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, those are the ones that don't sunset.
Okay. And then Dean wanted to weigh in too.
Well, I was going to say, in 2011, they amended code, the general provision, I think that's what Municipal Clerk referenced, that says they all terminate after 3 years unless otherwise provided. And then we have those that otherwise provide, they don't sunset. And then most of them included also a subsection that says they sunset every 3 years. But if they, I guess, you enact a new one, then you forget to add that, it still has the general provision that it will sunset after 3 years. So that's the default there in 405.
Okay, and so AO 2024-65, which is in your packet, the sunset audit is what I've called it here. It actually goes, it's set for public hearing in October, but it shifts a number of those dates 3 years out in October. So just as Mr. Gates said. Appointments to boards and commissions sometimes see qualifications of current code. I gave 2 examples there, really specific ones, the bidding review board and you may not know this board exists, but on-site water and wastewater technical review board, very specific one, but really the more technical and specific the board or commission is often has specific seat qualifications. And then boards and commissions can be created by code, and they can be changed and adapted over time. There are 2, I think, that are really relevant. One is AO coming up on Tuesday night, AO 2024-67 around the Design Advisory Board for the Port Modernization Program. That AO contemplates some changes to that board, which was created by code. So it's adapting to the needs over time. And then the Public Safety Advisory Commission, there's some contemplated changes by members. And I'm actually going to pause here for a minute and let Ms. Brawley, because I think it's very timely, give a quick update on where her and Mr. Perez-Verdia are on that one.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm just briefly searching for, here we go. Okay, yeah, because Cameron, who could not be here today, Mr. Perez-Verdia, gave me some points to make sure that I share. So the Public Safety Advisory Commission has been in our code for a long time, and then I think not really realized by a lot of us earlier this year, that commission has already sunsetted, so it doesn't exist. And so there were some appointments put forward, but because that board didn't exist, we of course took no action on those. So what Mr. Perez-Verdia and I are doing right now are just kind of in the exploratory phase. So we've reached out to some folks who used to serve on the Public Safety Advisory Commission to get their feedback. I know there's been kind of that board has had an evolution as far as what it's done over time and so on. And so we're just trying to get information. We're aware there's other community groups out there that also have kind of they discuss public safety, and the intent is to be community focused. So we're not trying to replace those groups or say this is instead of that. And then of course I want to acknowledge too around the kind of bigger conversations around public safety and accountability and kind of how the community can have visibility into that. I know there's an interest from some members of the public to kind of have a board that is more than just advisory and has more actual powers. So I'm just saying that because I know that conversation is out there. Right now, we are just kind of understanding a little better on this topic. We plan to bring this to the August Public Safety and Health Policy committee meeting, of which Mr. Perez-Verdia is the co-chair. And so we'll have a little bit more information to share. But at this point, we're not ready to bring forward, an idea. So I think at this point, there is interest in that. And I think the thing that we've heard from the community is, we want to make sure it's representative of the community. We need to really define its purpose. What is it taking on? And then what role can it play? And I think he and I believe there is a strong role that it can play, but it also depends on design. Because what we heard is that this commission, if it doesn't have, if it isn't trusted, if it isn't seen as something where we can have productive conversations, then maybe let's not do it, right? So I think we have to have this conversation. We're not assuming that at all costs we have to put this into place. We want to make sure it's effective. So we're going to keep meeting with others over the next couple months. I'll also note that right now there's only 2 of us on that item. So if there's a third person interested, we would welcome that. And also want to work with members of the administration on what that could look like. So that's the update. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Brawley. So really just wanted to use that as an opportunity to get an update, but also to really talk through how code can, how you can use code to change, adapt, or make a board or commission work, particularly as we find that they've either shifted in purpose or the needs have shifted explicitly. Also, I would point out, right, these things aren't mutually exclusive. The design advisory board, for instance, are designated seats with specific qualifications or holding specific positions, but it's also created by code. So next slide. So I'm briefly going to talk about this and then I'm going to turn it over to Claire. So on board is where you can find all of our information about boards and commissions. You can see vacancies, see membership, see board and commission specifics. So even the, the code section that governs it. And then this is where the public goes to apply as well. So if you have a constituent who is interested in board and commission service, this is where you could send them. And so I'm going to turn over to Claire to show us how to drive on board a little bit.
Thank you. I was having some computer issues, so I'm going to navigate from back here, and I just left my notes. So if you go to the mainmuni.org page and go to the mayor's box, you can access boards and commissions up in that toolbar. And that brings you to the boards and commissions page. I wanted to point out that there's a feed of all of the meetings here on the right side. So those are the ones coming up. And it pulls from our public notice page. So that is pretty up to date. And then if you know of someone who's interested in applying on a board, the application is right here. And this is for all, they can apply for any of the boards through this way. There's a drop-down menu with all of them listed. And then I wanted to show you some things about the boards. So just pick a board and dive into it. Each board has information with the description. A lot of them pull from their place in code. Not all. I'm assuming this is from code, but it's not cited. Some of them actually have code citations in there. And then you have the list of all the members. And I will applaud the previous administration. Richard Whitney did a ton of work to get this up to date. And for about the past, year, I have, every time they submit a board nomination to you, I double check to make sure on board is correct. So Richard Whitney and I work really closely. So I feel that most of this is pretty trustworthy information. But each board has a seat number, and you can go to that seat to see the history of who served in that before. And there is a term seed date right up here, 2017 for this one. So it should be every 3 years down here. And before we took over about a year ago, these were not up to date. They were scattered and random. And so Richard worked really hard to get them all on the correct terms. So we'll probably continue to check those to be safe, but I feel pretty confident in that information now. Then there are some boards that, like Ms. Zalatel said in her presentation, that have specific seats. And so I'm going to pull up one of those. And this was a new thing. So here's an example of where the code citation is, so you just can go right here. So this board has a lot of requirements of who sits on it, such as 2 members shall be architects, 2 members professional engineers. And then that was really hard to trace because the AMs that you get at your meetings don't say which seat they're filling. And so this was actually, I believe Bryce Wilbanks did this a while back for some boards, but not all. He changed those seat numbers instead of saying seat 1, 2, 3. Well, they're here, but he actually wrote in which seat that person's serving for. And so then that makes it easier to track to make sure that the right people are filling those seats. So that's just something to look out for in the future. I think Ms. Zalatel had listed the bidding board, and that one also has a lot of requirements, but those ones aren't listed in the title. So Ms. Jones for the administration, I think that's something to keep an eye on as you update these in the future to get that information on board, and then that'll make it just really clean going forward. And I believe that is all I had to share on how to use onboard. And I might need
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. This is mostly a comment. I really appreciate, I've used Onboard a lot in the last year or so, and I really appreciate that it does have that level of detail. I think it's helpful. And it's great that at some point we started tracking it so we can continue tracking it. And then the other thing I just want to note that, because I know that I've heard confusion about this, regardless of whether it's designated seats or not, if there is a set number of seats on the board, then that is why they all have numbers, right? And so if you're filling a board term, like when I was on the Budget Advisory Commission, those aren't designated seats. They aren't split up in any way. But I was still filling a seat, and I actually came on 6 months before that term had started. And so I think that I'm just mentioning that because I think there's a lot of confusion from the public about what that means, or, there was confusion among members, I think, too. And so even if it's not dedicated seats or whatever you want to call it, that there's a reason why you're still in seat A or whatever, just like, all of us are in whatever the 2 seats for our district are, and they have different numbers, or letters. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because it's something I've heard a lot of confusion about.
All right, next slide, we'll keep going. So how do these boards and commissions interact with assembly business? So go to the next slide. So we have adjudicatory boards and commissions, and we have advisory boards and commissions. So let's do adjudicatory first. So they're code-based authority to decide certain matters. They're often making final administrative decisions for the municipality. Those decisions are often subject to appeal to the Superior Court, and they don't get reviewed by us. So there are a number of boards there that make those decisions, Board of Equalization. I made the note here. I don't know that we've had the issue come up, but we are responsible for that board if it doesn't get enough recruits. We recruit and appoint those members, and if the Board of Equalization can't convene, it's us. So we have a special interest in that one. Board of Adjustment, Zoning Examiner and Appeals Board, Plating Board, and Planning and Zoning on certain matters.
If I could just briefly,
Yep.
that Board of Equalization one, it's worth noting if you were to flip back to the first page, and you don't have to, but there were 2 columns. One was charter and one was Title IV, but the Board of Equalization is actually not in Title IV. It's in the Assembly section of the code. So that's why we're responsible for it. It's ours and it's our duty. So there's a slight 3rd column, but there's so little there, it's not worth putting up there, but it's worth noting.
Title IV too. It's in Title IV as well.
Oh, interesting.
Reviewing the code sections, it's pretty typical that it'll be listed in Title IV, and then it will link to the section of code where it is all laid out. So it's both.
It's in both. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to note also, in terms of if we are the Board of Equalization, there was also just a state law change that doesn't affect us because we already have a Board of Equalization, but I believe it requires maybe just first-class cities, but there's certain local governments that have to have them now. So I wonder if maybe, I suppose it still defaults to us, but just to note, but that law didn't change our practice, but it is out there and changed other local governments' practice.
Okay, so in addition to adjudicatory boards or advisory boards, these are the ones where I think we might spend a little bit of the meat today. Advisory boards, there are kind of 3 different ways advisory resolutions can come to the assembly. One is via a code-based process before assembly action can take place. Good example of that is Planning and Zoning Commission. They make recommendations before the Assembly takes action on rezones and Title 21 text amendments, unless it's otherwise waived. And actually, the Design Advisory Board for the Port Modernization Program takes action, makes a recommendation to the mayor, and then that's transmitted to the Assembly prior to design decisions being approved. So those are made up in a particular way that code controls the actions, the timelines, and then how those things get transmitted to us before we take very particular action. Advisory boards can also issue resolutions via the Assembly's request. We can refer a matter or a particular issue to, let's say we were taking up a resolution around one of our sister cities. Maybe we would want to refer that question to the Sister Cities Commission to consider. They may give us a resolution, and then we would possibly take secondary action based on their recommendation. And then last is advisory resolutions can come via the board or commission's own initiative. Budget Advisory Commission often weighs in on the annual budget, so they're one that will do something of their own initiative. And I bring up those three ways. If we go to the next slide, I think this is where we really have the conversation is how do we want to use boards and commissions? And I think about it in terms of our committee work. I know Mr. Constance's done considerable amount, and actually the body, about thinking about our committees, how they're going to be structured, and how we can really make our work more cohesive and not have more meetings. And one of the things we can do is think about how boards and commissions can work alongside our committees. So one way to do that is referring items or matters. The Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee relies on various boards and commissions to advise it on technical matters, whether that's the Design Advisory Board. We've also heard from the Geotechnical Advisory Commission. Most of the utilities have actually all the utilities have their own boards. So there's really that opportunity to have those boards come talk with a committee if there's something in particular going on. We use the Geotechnical Advisory Commission specifically around setting the seismic standard for the port. And so they came to a committee meeting, briefed us. We had a really fulsome conversation before we then took action as a body. And then there's standing updates and reports. The Budget and Finance Committee provides a regular update to the Budget Advisory Committee. And then the Budget Advisory Committee is a standing item on that committee agenda. So it goes both ways. So there's this ongoing exchange of information. Anna or Ms. Brawley just went to the last Budget Advisory Commission meeting. They were talking about new revenue streams, and they're wanting to get involved in that conversation. And so we're able to give them some feedback that we're going to probably be seeking information as a body, and they can as well. So those that we would maybe invite to present to us, they could invite to present to them, for themselves. Also, often boards and commissions have someone from the administration or a department. So this is really opportunity, if you work closely with them, to make sure they're hearing from both branches of government. So that was the primary piece of just kind of setting the groundwork. Jennifer prepared this great handout. What's maybe not so great about it is there's a lot of boards and commissions. It's great that we have so much opportunity for public volunteering and participation. And so I would really encourage all members to walk away from today's work session at a minimum thinking maybe if you're a chair or co-chair or you're really involved in a committee, how you might intersect with the board and commission and how you can maybe tighten up those relationships if that seems to make good sense. And then I know there's been some conversations around, do we just have too many boards and commissions? And so I would say that if you tend to lean that way, it's a good opportunity to maybe look in code and see what they do, what they're supposed to do. And if it's truly that we don't need that, or is it more a question of we're not getting what code suggests we should be getting? Because I think there's potential substantive defects, but then I think there are just some procedural hiccups, and those are two different remedies. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's all I had, was just to really start the conversation if people want to talk about specific ones or generally jump in and talk about maybe anything related to boards and commissions.
All right, so for practical matters, the sunset ordinance that's 2024-65 will be back before us October 8th, 2024. So that gives us an arc in time to have some of these conversations relating to boards and commissions that members might have thoughts about sunsetting. At that point, the sunset process is very easy. You just amend the date on that ordinance in that one line of that one item. So we also have before us a stack of ordinances that are concurrent or coming relating to boards and commissions. And so first, though, do questions have any comments or questions regarding the presentation? And want to speak now. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess I've got two sets of comments, so I guess I'm just going to say one specific one, and then I'll see, because I don't want to hijack the conversation. One example, just thinking about how to effectively utilize the Budget Advisory Commission, and I'll just give an example. So this is how they interact with the Budget and Finance Committee. And I don't know if it's unique to this commission, but it's doesn't seem to be typical, so I just want to share it. In our agenda on the Budget and Finance Committee, so the Assembly Committee, we have a standing item that is a report from the chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. And you guys have all experienced that. Usually what it is that they meet, or maybe that they don't have quorum, right? That there's been kind of different levels of reports, but in theory, if they have been talking about a topic or they're working on a recommendation, that is a way that they can formally do that. And then conversely, just like what happened yesterday, on their monthly meetings, they have standing reports from assembly members, from the school board, and then from the OMB director, and then in addition to whatever other topics they have. And so that's why I was there for the most part. And then Vice Chair Zolotow and I trade off because we're the co-chairs of Budget and Finance. So and that is a commission that historically has been very active, is very much looking at the policy of the city, participates in some way in the budget process. And I think we're trying to get back to that, because it's been a little while since it's functioned that way. And I'm not suggesting that every commission or board should operate that way, but I think it is something to think about, or if there are active advisory boards that directly relate to a topic, or there's a way to do that. That's one way to do it, but it is a very formal way, and it's built into the agendas. And so I think there's also a lot of other ways to do it. I just want to offer that's one way that's being done now.
Other members? Okay, so I'm going to do a little hijackery because we have time, tons of time. We don't need it all, but just we have these items before us. There are three separate from the main one, which is the sunset provision hearing on October 8th. So, and we've heard briefly that AO 2024-66 is reconstituting the Americans with Disabilities Act Advisory Commission. Does anyone want to talk about that one? This is pretty straightforward. Like the Public Safety Advisory Commission, it incidentally expired, sunset, without having substantive conversation or being brought before us. So, okay, I'm not seeing anyone that wants to speak on that. Then I have 2024-72 that's coming before us Tuesday. And so I'll just kind of walk folks through what it does. The intent behind this.
Well, that one's just for intro on Tuesday.
Oh, it's just introduced. That's right, for first reading. So it's coming before us. I'll just speak to it though briefly. And I don't think this has any direct impact on the work you have, Ms. Zolotow, at this time. You can feel free to hang out, but the Houseless Lived Experience Advisory Board was set up with a ton of optimism and idealism, and it has not lived up to its promise. In fact, it's never delivered to us any of these elements that are required under the code. And so the proposal now is not to simply abolish this commission, it's to end it at this time, and then go through a working process as the committee with some staff and equity office to reconstitute it with some more adjusted duties under the code and just a completely clean slate. And so the intent is not to eliminate the voice that we have attempted to create, but it is to completely reboot it, start whole cloth new. So that's why this is coming before. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. Not to speak specifically about the Houseless Lived Experience Advisory Board, but when members choose to take that up, I would recommend taking a look at the Housing, Homelessness, and Neighborhood Development Commission at the same time and see if there isn't some synergies there, and perhaps using the code for particular designated seats to achieve both aims maybe in one opportunity.
Right, which hits the mission of fewer meetings, fewer committees to get the work done. So we're less, running around meeting to meeting. So anyone else on this item? I just wanted to put it for you. Yep. And then I have one last one that is coming before us on Tuesday now for sure. It's it's 2024-67. It's an ordinance of the Assembly amending the code to change or reauthorize the Design Advisory Board for the Port of Alaska modernization, but also to modify it. Right, that's right. But it's on the agenda tomorrow. So since it's here and we have an hour, we're not going to hit that hour, obviously. I just want to speak briefly to it, kind of the first time. But as Ms. Alto said, we've scheduled a work session specifically on this item to hear from members of the port community and others to tell us their thoughts on this proposal. And that'll be on the 26th, I believe. And so we'll be able to hear that one. The public hearing will be continued to the meeting of the second meeting in July. So, but what it effectively does, and you'll learn a bit more about this probably if you attend Enterprise and Utilities this week. Is it this week or next week? Next week. Yeah, I don't want to skip the weekend. That the port process has been an extraordinary story. Someone's going to write a book about it someday. We had a 20-year failed effort. We're waiting for a decision on appeal for a multi-$100 million settlement that we won in the federal court of claims, U.S. Court of Claims, for a failure of the federal government to meet its responsibilities in managing a massive project. And then, so that failure led us to another effort, the Port Modernization Project. And that Port Modernization Project, when I first got on the body, was faltering. And in this room, I can remember the day it went from being a $1 billion project to a $2 billion project in 1 hour, which was a shock to the system. And the continuous feedback we'd heard from the port users was, all of this is happening and nobody is talking to us, and this is going to happen to us. And so, we shouldn't be making laws that happen to people without hearing from those people. So what we did was to create a system of being heard. We created a Port Design Advisory Board, which has a set of individuals who serve on it, and their purpose is to provide feedback on the design. Now, at the Enterprise meeting next week, you'll be hearing a lot about the identified design for Terminal 1, not Terminal 2, and kind of the contract rules and all of the fine details that are the product of this work, plus the port doing its efforts to get the port built. And some have argued that the port design process is nearly complete, which in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. But the argument has been made. It was asserted we should just let it sunset because it's done its work. I do not share such an idealistic appraisal because the challenges now are not in design. The challenges are in construction. And the reality of any mega construction project is it can be death by 1,000 cuts, meaning change order, change order, change order. The project is completely different than when it started, and nobody except the person running the contract knows what happened. So you, or the appropriators, made a decision, and your decision was effectively diminished because through change order, the scope is completely changed. And so what this will do is convert the Design Advisory Board to a Design and Construction Advisory Board. Now, the construction function isn't going to be that they're managing construction like, is the project built to standard? It's really along the lines of hearing, I think, in fact, the language is in there about, and thank you, Mr. Gates, for getting this section in there, hearing reports annually from the the department from the port on how the construction is moving, how the finances are, how it's being funded quarterly, getting a construction process report to include project on each of the components that are ongoing at the time, the financing needs that are being used, and changes in sequencing and timing of the projects that might impact the total time of the construction project, and a summary of any change orders. So then the board will receive this. These are the people who have to write the checks effectively through the tariffs to pay for this construction if in the end we use the the tariff model for construction, which is, except for any grants that we receive or other vehicles, the way we're going to do this. And so they'll be the first review before it comes to us on whether the change orders make sense. They're going to know a whole lot more than we are about, does that make sense? Because they're the ones that are in the middle of it. And so they'll report to the mayor, and then the report will come to us. And it also authorizes a minority report, meaning if there's a majority that's made a decision and a minority has a different opinion, they can also file a report. So we're not just going to be receiving the party line, we'll be receiving the opinion of the majority plus the opinion of the minority. So when the question properly comes before us, it will be informed by all sides of the question. So the gist of that item is that it restructures it. It actually takes a vote away from the administration. It adds 2 votes from the building trades, because the biggest challenge that we face in this climate right now is staffing. It's manning major projects over time. And this is a 10 to 15 year project. And if we're not careful, we're going to run out of workers halfway through. But if we're careful, we can create the workforce we need at the tail end of the project by using the project to build the workforce we need. And so we're adding folks who are involved in the construction process to the board, so that it's not just the owners, it's the actual builders and the owners. So that's the gist. I know we'll have a work session because we want to hear from the other parties, but I wanted to take the time to talk about it since we scheduled so much time here. Ms. Alto.
So I'm going to pull us back up a couple 10,000 feet. So this is a really great example of where an issue came up that the assembly wasn't getting good information on, and we were able to create something that worked for us. You never want a group of assembly members in value engineering a port project, which is where we were. And the design advisory board came out of going through that harrowing process. So as you see things kind of going in a way, the first question I would ask is there a current board or commission that has technical expertise that could help with an issue? I think that's always really the first place to start. If not, then do we need some kind of advisory help? We cannot be technical experts in everything. We are probably a mile wide and an inch deep with most of our expertise because the municipality is so vast. But these boards and commissions can really dig in. So I guess I just wanted to hold that up as an example. And it's really been a game changer for the port project.
And it will go away, but not until we have a new port and our food security is in place. 50 to 75 years. And we actually are already planning for the next port, right? Because we've already been making preliminary discussions about funding. You know, you spend a little now, it invested properly, it becomes a lot later. And so we shouldn't finish the port project without establishing a methodology for paying for the next phase. So $1 today is $1 million next, 20, 50, 100 years. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, I'm going to also kind of go broad. This was the other kind of set of comments I wanted to put on the table to think about, and also recognizing this is kind of beyond the question of how we work with Board or Commission. I think those are really good questions to ask. But for my mind, the global questions are, how do we make sure that the ones that we have are functioning, and that the people who participate in them feel like it's meaningful, and that they are producing something meaningful, right? Or whatever that ends up being. So here's kind of some thoughts. These are a great way to get citizens involved, right? To either use the expertise we have in the community or the houseless lived experience. The purpose of that really was to elevate voices who are not normally heard in our processes, right? So there's a value to having, regular people basically for various, or just having citizen advisory who isn't a subject matter expert. So there's a lot of ways they can be used and that they are used. I also think they should have a purpose, right? So that if we put people on it, it's not just asking everybody's opinions about a topic, right? That they have some kind of direction. And often it is up to the board and commission members, especially the chair, to kind of help set that direction, right? And so that's empowering them to do that is important. And this is where I'm going with this. The other thing to keep in mind is that each of these boards has a cost, right? And this is something that often happens where we pass legislation and it is not our job to implement it, right? But ultimately that is still a question that needs to be answered and the implications need to be understood. So some of the costs that they have, and this is coming from having heard directly from some folks on boards and commissions and frustrations the last few years. They need staff support. So they need to have a person who's working with them, one or more people. Often it's within a department, like with Budget Advisory Commission, it's with OMB, Office of Audit Management and Budget. Some of them don't have a really obvious, point of contact necessarily, but they've been supported. Could be through the mayor's office, could be through clerk staff. But that's one cost. The other one is that it's small, but each of them, the sunset audit is a time cost for the city, right? Because, we have way more things that we can audit or should be auditing than we have the capacity to do. So just to know that, the cost is staffing it for the 3 years it's around, doing the sunset audit to decide if we should keep it. And then that's competing with every other audit priority. And then there's also nominal costs for putting up public notices, printing materials, getting those materials out to the public, right? So there is an administrative cost. And I mention that because we don't really do any of that mostly. I mean, the clerk staff does for some of these. And then I think the broader cost is when those things aren't working, when the board isn't feeling supported, when it doesn't have a purpose, when the right people aren't on there, whatever it is, maybe that people aren't showing up, then the cost is to the community because people don't feel like their time is valued, or they don't feel like they have a meaningful chance to participate. Maybe they're not feeling like what they're saying is being written down, for example. There's all kinds of different issues. And so I think what I'm interested in is not just how do we reduce the number of them or combine them or whatever we need to do to make it more efficient, but really also what capacity do we have in the administration or in the municipality to support all of these boards? Because I think I'm really interested in not just maintaining structures for the sake of maintaining them. If they have to change, they have to change. And so that's a question that I put to a few of the members of the administration, not expecting an answer in the work session today. But I would be curious, Ms. Jones, your thoughts on that, just having your prior experience with the municipality as well. If you have initial thoughts on that, because I think it is a question to figure out, what do we have capacity to do? How much does it take to run a board like that? Some probably take more energy than others. And a lot of them do have really good functions, but I just wanted to put those on the table as things to think about as we move into what these boards do, because there is, again, costs associated with all of them. And there is great benefit to be gained when they are working well and they have people who feel excited about and feel, energy and bring that energy to the municipality as advisors. So all of that I will leave to Barbara to maybe respond to with some initial thoughts.
Ms. Brawley, I think you're correct that staff throughout the municipality need to be excited about a board or commission that they staff. And I think for those of us who have staffed important boards and commission, I've staffed the Equal Rights Commission, I've staffed the Board of Ethics, and it's fun when the commissions are doing what they're supposed to do. But I think sometimes staff, and I'm talking about myself supporting other boards and commissions, you find that you have no money and no time to do all of the work that you described. And then nobody shows up. And that's demoralizing, I guess you could say, which I think was what you were suggesting. So I think it's worth a look. And I think we probably just need to ask municipal staff that are staffing these boards and commissions how they're feeling about it, how their training is going. I have seen the board and commission pamphlet that people have mentioned that Richard Whitney did. It's really good. And I think we need to continue to support the boards and commissions in that fashion.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I was just raising questions that I think are going to take some time to answer. And again, I'm not suggesting that we should let just, staff capacity or interest drive, what the policy is as far as these boards. But I think we have to meet in the middle somewhere. So I just wanted to raise these questions as we continue to look at these boards and think about kind of how to make them successful.
I think that principle generalizes to almost every aspect of the work that we do as policymakers. The reality of the CIP and the CIB, everybody wants their project and everyone wants their project this year. And we only have so many staff in design. We only have so many staff in planning, and we only have so many staff in building to do so many projects in any given year. And so that's just one example. And so that conversation is important to keep in mind as we do our work, that there is a staging and a timing and a kind of a prioritization that we need to do through our policy work to make sure that the work that's getting handed off to the administration to execute is achievable. Otherwise, not only are they frustrated because they don't have the resources or the support, we're frustrated because it doesn't get done. Maybe there's some irrational expectations going on. And so, but there is an expectation that we will maintain the work that this Assembly legislative team did with Richard to get that thing cleaned up, because that was a huge Goliath effort. And it is, yeah, this is the work of a decade. When you talk about omnibus rewrites of this or that code, this was one of those omnibus efforts to go appointment by appointment and square up the terms that were wrong by previous administrations that were made everything out of alignment. And then we had to clean all of that up. And oh my God. So the goal is, at least for the next 21 months, not to get back to that place. So, Daniel?
Yeah, I think a lot of my head is at where Member Brawley is at too. And just thinking about like the staffing issues, the amount of time it takes, recruiting enough members of the community to be part of these boards and to show up regularly. I think Anna and I were just talking yesterday about the Budget Advisory Commission, and she used to be on that commission. I think you chaired it, didn't you? Yeah. And I said, yeah, well, that's interesting because it's a really important commission. And I know that we get reports from them every time we have our budget committee, but I think it's been a long time since I've personally seen like a resolution from them or actual work product. And I think what would be interesting for me is if the boards and commission did like a annual report. Here's the items that we've taken up. Here's the work that we've done. Here's the issues that we've explored. Here's the recommendations that we've forwarded on to the assembly, just so I can have a firmer idea of like, what is the productivity? What's coming out of these boards? What is the advice that's coming on to us? And I think 9 times out of 10, probably what we would see is, yeah, these are of enormous value. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll hand it to you in just a second. The one thing I would offer is, I think what Anna said is we have to be careful of. If we were to ask every one of these boards and commissions to submit a report detailing their performance for the year, I know we do that for the ombudsman and their efforts, but that takes scores of hours and a ton of money. And if we aren't capable of appropriating money to fund the work to do that, then it's one more of those dilemmas where how are we going to get quality work if we don't have the people to do it? And so there's, I think, the line that I think we have to figure out. And Ms. Alto.
Thanks. And I know you came in a little bit late, but I did a little PowerPoint. And part of it was to ask committee leadership to think about where boards and commissions intersect with your work and how they could be tighter, kind of like the Budget Advisory Commission. We used to get a resolution from them on the budget every year. And then similarly, there's a slide in there about ways work can actually get referred to them as well, and we can get input. And I think that's really, the question I always have is like kind of what's the highest and best use? And some of it needs to be probably us being a bit more proactive and asking them to think about things. When we did the child care AO, I'm trying to think back a little bit, and I'm looking at Claire because she was involved. I think we reached out to the Women's Commission and a couple, or Jennifer, I can't remember. The family leave one. Yeah. We reached out to the personnel committee at the time. Like we reached out to someone. So we went with a proposal before we introduced it and said, hey, what do you guys think? So I think that that's kind of both directions. Cause I think if we don't do anything with reports we get from them too, then maybe they won't feel valued.
One last note, also, the Budget Advisory Committee is a great example of alternatives, and the way that in the alternative that they've achieved that is, and we talked about this, it's the every month report from the chair on what they're doing. And so it might, I'm not going to suggest this because it took so long beyond putting it out there as one more scenario, be that with our committees, the committees adopt germane boards and commissions to be a place where specific individual leaders from commissions could come forward and make reports, so that at least not in a formalized written communication, there is an ongoing feedback loop so that the members can feel like something's happening and the commission can feel heard. And so there's something there. I don't want to add anything onto the committee conversation at this time because I think I've just sorted through it almost, still waiting for some people to turn in their committees of choice before they get assigned. But anyhow, I think there's a lot of creative ways we can get there to demand and to provide an opportunity and support feedback. Anna.
Yeah, separate topic, but I realize we can't let this opportunity pass after what's happened in the last 3 years, I'd say. Library Advisory Board. And that is a great example of where we made some changes to the code, some minor changes to clarify what their role is. And I think that was helpful. But I think also that is a good situation where I don't think the code is the problem. I don't think the institutional support is the problem. It's really kind of what is the vision of the executive leadership for who they're putting on the board and what that board is going to do, and then how does that intersect with the larger community interest in the library specifically, because there is such strong, there's the Library Foundation, Friends of the Library. There's a lot of people who care about the library, right, and have a lot of there's a lot of history around what it's done and what places, all those things. So all of that just to say, I think that has been a battleground for the last few years, and I'm looking forward to that not being the case anymore. And I think a lot of it comes down to making sure that the appointments that come forward are representative of and consistent with the broad mission of the library. And so I say all that because it's not that every board needs code change or needs things. It really depends on how who's on them and how they operate, right? And it's not even so much about the individuals, but kind of like what clear charge they have, and again, how they reflect the larger mission that they are a part of. And so anyway, I just mostly just wanted to say that because we hadn't said Library Advisory Board for a while, but I think that's a great example where I am looking for that board to be revitalized by the committed and passionate people who are on it, and then let them figure out what they want to do next.
Ms. Alto.
Thanks. This reminded me something I was supposed to underscore that Jennifer, Claire, and I talked about, which is those adjudicatory boards that I had mentioned in the slides. When we make those appointments, we may want to really think about those. Those are deciding administrative matters for the municipality. Although we may not have a lot of interaction with those boards, they're making very big decisions on behalf of the municipality, which can be appealed to court. So just taking a minute, often we will scrutinize maybe something that's been a hot topic like the Library Advisory Board, but these ones that are quietly and consistently doing this work, this administrative work, it's really important that we get highly qualified people on those. Thanks.
Oh yeah, Claire, I'm sorry.
When Ms. Jones was the clerk, she and I came up with a plan to have the different boards report to you at Rules Committee, and we got through a handful of those, and then Rules Committee is just so busy that we kind of lost that habit. But I think one of our things we were thinking was what Mr. Constant just said, was to have them report to the relevant committees. And maybe you don't, Budget Advisory Committee, that makes sense for them to report every month, but maybe the trust fund just reports once a year, or another committee might not be as active in there every 2 or 3 years once they have changes. So I think we already have a list matching most of the boards and commissions to a assembly committee, so I can dig that up for you.
Yeah, and I don't mean to suggest that every single one of those commissions and boards provides a regular report to any committee, because then that committee would no longer function because there's so many boards and commissions. But anything that's really and truly germane, let's make a home for these conversations. Others, anyone? Ms. Jones?
I just wanted to let everyone know, I'm sure you may have talked about this morning at the Assembly Leadership Meeting, but the mayor does have some nominees that are good people for some of the vacant boards or commissions, and I anticipate that you may have some names of people too. And thank you to Ms. Alatel and Ms. Ross for showing you how to use Onboard. And we'd like to encourage you to tell people to apply there. And we'll certainly take a look at those and hopefully get them appointed. Thanks.
I promise when we're done to remind everybody what's happening Tuesday night.
Ms. Alatal, to close us out.
All right, yes, I promised I would remind everybody what the plan is for Tuesday night for the boards and commission appointments that are pending. So the intention is for there to be a motion to take up all of them at the same time, except for one, and that one that we're going to take up separately is because it's a mistake. We just need to dispatch with it. The clerk found an error. And then move to postpone them indefinitely. However, prior to that point, members may pull ones they wish to vote on, and the administration indicated that they will let us know if they have a list of ones that they wish for us to vote on separately prior to Tuesday night. Exciting.
Actually, I'm curious on the one that is the mistake. Does it hurt if we postpone it indefinitely?
It's double seated.
Well, I corrected the original version, so
But we have the item on the agenda. So one, it
we need
dies
to
for lack.
dispatch with it one way or another.
Lyford, yeah, so I think we just leave it in the motion to postpone indefinitely. We don't have to do anything extraordinary for it.
It's not in it though. It's outside of the clerk's note, but up to you.
Yeah, but I think that the simplest act would just be leave it in the list of all the ones getting postponed indefinitely, unless there's some,
When we published the addendum, we did add another clerk's note.
that's fine. But from the action-based perspective, we let it die for lack of action, or we postpone it indefinitely. We don't approve and then vote it down because we already have her on that seat. That would be a not valid action, I think, but.
Well, yeah, I think I would prefer postpone indefinitely just
Yeah.
because it's
Exactly.
the wrong seat.
So except for the first item in the 11s, which is a separate item altogether, not an appointment to a board or a commission, we'll take them all up as a slate, and then motion will be postponed indefinitely, and then anyone can pull off items. So thank you for bringing that back up. Is there anything else?
It's Friday.
Is it Friday? So except for Ms. Zalatal and the council, everyone have a good weekend.
Look how we were called behind. I know.